"Professor, there's a big lizard back there and he's headed this way. Now get aboard." That line was taken from the 1969 film, The Valley of Gwangi. And we're getting ready to talk about it. The Valley of Gwangi is a film that is near and dear to my heart, which is why I've chosen it for my first retro review. Many of you may not have heard of it, many of you may have. If you haven't, you should check it out. The Valley of Gwangi was released in September of 1969. I was 5 years old and my grandfather had decided to take me to the movies that afternoon. I was going to see a cowboy dinosaur movie, which were two of my favorite things, so why not go? Well, I walked into this darkened theater with my granddad, and there was all these strange faces in there, and on this huge screen in front of me were dinosaurs. And they were roaring, and they were chasing people, and people were screaming, and I started screaming. And out into the street in front of the theater I went, just as fast as I could go. Well, my granddad, God bless him, not wanting to see his grandson get squashed in the street, retrieved me and forced me to watch this 90-minute film where a group of cowboys discover a forbidden valley in old Mexico and bring back a live Allosaurus. Things do not go well, as you can imagine, and I loved every bit of it. I was frozen, my eyes were locked onto the screen, and I've never been the same since. I probably wouldn't be talking to you about movies at all if it wasn't for Gwangi. Valley of Gwangi stars James Franciscus, Gila Golan, Laurence, Naismith, and Richard Carlson. It is set at the turn of the century, from the 19th to the 20th century, in an unnamed Mexican town. T.J. Breckenridge is the proprietor of a struggling Wild West show. Her ex-boyfriend, Tuck Kirby, comes into town trying to rekindle a romance which she wants no part of, and also maybe to join up with her in some way with her circus. We discover that TJ has acquired a prehistoric horse known as an Eohippus. He's about the size of a Chihuahua, and his name is El Diablo. Well, Kirby, who is friends with a local paleontologist played by Laurence Naismith, tips him off about the existence of this little horse. And with dollar signs dancing in his head and trying to find an entire herd of these little horses, the professor tells a local band of gypsies who are very superstitious about El Diablo. They take him back to the Forbidden Valley from whence he came. The cowboys go in pursuit, and there they meet the star of the film, Gwangi himself. And this is where the film truly shines and kicks into high gear. Boy, do we get some rock'em, sock'em, stop motion animation effects. This is by far one of the best dinosaur films ever made. Even though it's from the 60s, it is still the measuring stick by which many current filmmakers go. There is actually one scene in the film that is one of the best stop motion scenes ever made, where Gwangi is roped by a group of cowboys. These effects were created by the maestro of special effects, Ray Harryhausen. If you are not familiar with Ray, he is single-handedly responsible for creating some of the best stop-motion creatures ever committed to film. You have the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, the Emir from 20 Million Miles to Earth, the Cyclops from the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, the Medusa from Clash of the Titans, and that's just a few of his creations. Harryhausen built these models, which averaged 13, 14 inches high, and he animated them painstakingly, one movement at a time, by himself in a room on a table with a camera. And he could put more character and more personality into his animated figures than it seems like teams of CGI artists can do these days. His stop motion had a fantastical quality to it that has never been recreated. And even though it seems old hat to most people that are under the age of 30 these days, it's still hard to deny the achievement that this man, what this man achieved by himself, with just a vision and an eye for sculpture and art and movement. It really was fantastic. The scene where the cowboys rope Gwangi is a real showstopper, and I was surprised to find out, even as a child, when I was reading about Ray Harryhausen, that it was achieved by putting a 14-foot pole on the back of a Jeep, and the cowboys actually roped the pole. Harryhausen came in later and added Gwangi into the film, but it is very entertaining. It is back when G-rated movies could have people getting eaten by dinosaurs and still be rated G. They didn't have to be PG-13. And Gwangi is not a very friendly lead character. He is constantly moving. His tail is constantly swishing, jaws constantly snapping. You forget that you're not actually looking at a living, breathing thing when you watch him come onto the screen. Technically, the movie is a small wonder, and musically it has a great score by composer Jerome Ross, who is famous for his score for Wagon Train. And even as a child, I find myself humming many of the themes from that film. And to this day, I still listen to the soundtrack periodically. So, Gwangi came out in 1969 at a very weird time for Hollywood. It was the free love, Vietnam. People were starting to go for protest pictures like Midnight Cowboy and Bonnie and Clyde, Easy Rider, things like that. Hollywood was losing its innocence. It was the year of Charles Manson and the Tate murders. Gwangi was given the short end of the stick by Warner Brothers during its release. It was originally shot to Columbia Pictures, but they passed on it. Warner Brothers picked it up, and then there was a management shuffle at Warner Brothers. So Warner Brothers 7 Arts, as they call themselves, they released it to the public with no fanfare, hardly any marketing at all. They put it on a double bill with some film that no one's ever heard of. A lot of people didn't even realize what the film was about. So it was just kind of dumped out there on the market, and therefore it did not do well at the box office. But thanks to the CBS Late movie and reruns on television years later, and adults such as myself who were kids during that time that would sit up until 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning to watch it on a late night movie show, Gwangi became quite popular, even though it is one of the hardest Harryhausen films to catch being aired on a network or streaming. You can currently watch it on all of the normal streaming formats like Vudu, Amazon, Fandango. It's available to rent or own. And The Valley of Gwangi is a very entertaining film. It is the kind of film that they don't make anymore. It's the kind of film I wish they did make. And it is the inspiration to a lot of modern day filmmakers like Steven Spielberg, Stan Winston, Tim Burton, Peter Jackson. Any of them will tell you that without Ray Harryhausen and his special effects, there would be no Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park borrowed a lot from the Valley of Gwangi, especially the scene where the T-Rex attacks the Gallimimus all of a sudden when you're not expecting it. That is a direct lift from the Valley of Gwangi and Gwangi's first appearance. A lot of people will look at stop motion and say, oh, well, that's fake. Well, you need to suspend your disbelief for just a little while and realize that stop motion gives things a fairy tale, a fantasy quality that CGI just cannot reproduce. And whenever I sit down to watch Gwangi, I forget. I don't even think about the fact that he's an animated model. To me, he is a living, breathing, moving dinosaur. I think the story is great. I think it has an old-fashioned romance in it. Some people may think it's corny, but I found it to be, just fine. Some people think the acting is wooden for films of this period. Well, you have to look at an older film for what an older film is, and if you can't appreciate that, if you're one of these people that says, oh, well, I can't watch anything that was made before 1980 or 1990, well, you're missing out on a lot of good entertainment. So I'm going to give The Valley of Gwangi, partly because I love the film so. My personal rating, of course, is going to be 4 reels, but for the average viewer, I'm going to give it a good solid 3.5 reels, because it does have kind of a typical King Kong standard storyline. But as far as the special effects and everything else, the film is just highly entertaining, and it's just a terrific piece of entertainment. I wish they made more movies like this, but they do not, sadly. Anyway, Thanks for joining me right here at Rob's Retro Reviews. We'll see you next time. And remember, subscribe, baby, subscribe.